Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Simon Cleobury. He is the head of arms control and disarmament at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. He was with the British government for years, where he represented the United Kingdom at the United Nations. But today we will talk about the growing chatter about the Falkland Islands, or what Argentines refer to as Malvinas Islands. Simon, welcome and thank you for speaking to Fair Observer.
Rohan, thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Okay, right off the bat, can you tell us why the Falkland Islands are disputed between the UK and Argentina, two countries that are almost thousands of kilometers apart? What are the origins of this dispute, and can you tell us some of the historic hostilities that have taken place over the islands?
Yeah, sure. So for the origins of the dispute, you need to go back to the 17th century. It was actually the English that first landed on the islands in 1690 and gave them their English language name, which is the Falkland Islands. In fact, it was the French that first settled the islands in 1764, and they gave it the name then Malvinas, which is because the sailors had come from Saint-Malo in France, and so that's where the name comes from. And the French weren't there for long, though. The British took over the following year. However, that didn't last very long either, as they were driven off the islands by the Spanish. But it's really in 1820 when the current dispute that we're talking about started, because Argentina, which had gained its independence from Spain in 1816, proclaimed sovereignty over the islands, which they called Las Malvinas, as you said, taking the name from what the French sailors first called it. And they proclaimed sovereignty, and they had a small settlement on the island. But then from 1833, the British came back, and really from then on, they consolidated their control of the islands, and really for quite a long period then the dispute was perhaps dormant, or not making waves internationally. It was really after the Second World War, after the creation of the United Nations, where the issue of territories like the Falkland Islands came to more political prominence. And in fact, in 1965, there was a UN General Assembly resolution that called on Argentina and the UK to try and resolve their dispute peacefully. There were negotiations that happened as a result of that resolution, but didn't resolve anything. But then things dramatically changed in 1982 when the military government in Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, and there then followed a 10-week war, which the UK won, having sent a military task force. That the government of Margaret Thatcher sent a military task force to retake the islands, which they successfully did, and forced the surrender of Argentinian troops. However, the hostilities, that war did not end the matter, and the status of the islands still remains disputed today.
And the reason we're talking about the islands today is because of US President Donald Trump, because there are leaked memos that have come out of Pentagon that state that the Trump administration is considering offering diplomatic support to Argentina over the Falkland Islands. And the Trump administration, and these reports are saying that the Trump administration wants to do that because they're unhappy with the UK over their support to the US over the war in Iran. Now, help us make sense of how any of this is connected. And secondly, does it even worry the UK about how these reports are playing out?
Well, I was surprised to see this. I didn't see this one coming. Let's put it like that. How much does it worry the UK? I mean, I think if the US did offer diplomatic support to Argentina over the Falkland Islands, then that would worry the UK a lot. It would be a significant change of position. If the US gave political support, it would likely lead Argentina to have a renewed effort to assert its sovereignty over the islands, and perhaps a renewed effort through the United Nations. And if the US sided with Argentina through a UN process, then I think the UK would be under a lot of pressure. To agree to open or reopen talks on sovereignty. That said, I think, and to try and make sense of this a little bit, I think you're absolutely right that the US. This leaked memo is in the context of the Iran crisis at the moment, and the fact that Keir Starmer has not allowed the UK to join or to participate fully in that conflict alongside the US with Iran. That's the context. However, I personally don't think that the US is going to change its position here. And I think, obviously, this hit the news when the memo leaked. But since then, I think there's been a clarificatory statement by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. He said, "Oh, it was just an email. Don't worry about it." We then had the successful state visit by King Charles, which I think did a lot to rebuild a difficult relationship between the US and the UK right now. And so I think from the UK perspective, I think any initial concern has probably reduced. That said, I think the UK, will still be thinking about how it would deal with a situation where the US did change its position diplomatically. Because, I've mentioned the fact that if there was support from the US for Argentina at the UN, that would be very difficult kind of politically. But there's also the military dimension to it as well. And I think it's worth mentioning that it's widely stated by commentators that the US's military support to the UK in 1982 was crucial to the UK coming out successfully in that conflict. And so if and I'm really not saying that that there is going to be another conflict over the Falklands, but if there was, and the US withheld their military support because they changed their diplomatic position, then I think that would be very significant. And I would expect the UK, at least in the Ministry of Defence, to be at least thinking about how to deal with that scenario. But as I say, I think everything has calmed down now, and I think you have to see it in the context of Trump's frustration over Starmer's lack of full support for what he was doing in the conflict with Iran.
Right. So, okay, that's interesting, because then it looks like, if you look at it from Trump's viewpoint, is it really about the islands, or more about punishing Keir Starmer for not backing the war in Iran?
I think it's much more about the US coming up with ways to put pressure on, leverage, maybe even some people say punish NATO countries for not participating or not supporting the war in Iraq enough. And it looks as if they were looking at ways to put pressure on a number of different NATO countries. Spain, for example, I think has been mentioned as well. So I doubt that Trump really cares about the islands. The thing he does care about, and the thing that I think he's trying to do is hit Starmer where it hurts, and this is a sensitive issue for Starmer politically, at a time where he is quite politically weak at the moment. He's struggling. He's struggling domestically in the UK right now, and if he was perceived to be wavering on the UK's position on sovereignty of the Falkland Islands, he would be heavily criticised domestically. So, and Trump knows that. And I think it also needs to be seen in the context of what's happening with regards to the Chagos Islands. Is another another British overseas territory where Starmer has been accused of his deal with Mauritius. He's been accused of giving up British territory, which has played very badly in the media and led to a lot of criticism. So this is a kind of a sore area. This point around British overseas territories is already a sensitive issue for Starmer. So I think that's the context. However, if I may just add, Rohan, I think I don't think the US position has really been thought through very clearly here, because you could argue that any push from Trump for the UK to give up the Falkland Islands in support of the Argentinian position would be contradictory to his position on the Chagos Islands, where his latest position, and I say latest because he has changed his position on this, but his latest position is that the UK should not give up sovereignty to Mauritius. Of course, the big difference between the Chagos Islands and the Falkland Islands is that there is a military base at Diego Garcia, which is important for both the US and the UK from a military perspective, whereas the Falkland Islands are not at all militarily important for the US. So, just to say, I think it's much more about Iran than any sudden interest from Trump in the Falkland Islands.
Right. But okay, Simon, but it's interesting you say that. But we also see that the Trump administration is really pushing forward with what they call the Monroe Doctrine, where they've said that the Western Hemisphere will be heavily under American control, it will be under American influence. And that they will have governments that are pro-American, and we've already seen what they've done with Venezuela. We're already seeing that they're trying to do something similar in Cuba. Well, geographically speaking, the Falkland Islands are in in this hemisphere. They will fall under the Monroe Doctrine. So, given how Donald Trump is, I mean, of course, no one can put a finger because he's so mercurial. Do you think he will arm twist the UK further into using these islands as leverage? Maybe he wants something else from the UK, and he will keep bringing up this card because he will say, hey, these islands are in the Western Hemisphere. I am going forward with the Monroe Doctrine. It is our say that you will have to accept if you want to be our ally.
Yeah, I'm sure that Trump will continue to want to use leverage that he has to get the things that he wants, and I'm sure there will be more arm twisting from Trump, particularly in the context of Iran and his call for NATO countries to do more. I mean, as I've said, I'm not sure that this issue gives him the most leverage. But knowing Trump, once it's out there, that means it's out there, and he may well use it again. I mean, as for the so-called, or what they call the Monroe Doctrine, which relates to asserting U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, I mean, you're right to raise this because there is an argument that says siding more with Argentina on this issue, at least diplomatically, could help boost the perception of the U.S. Amongst Latin American countries. But I still take the view that I think that any diplomatic gains with the countries of the region, they wouldn't outweigh the diplomatic fallout with the UK on this. So I don't think that he will press this one. I think it's. I think. I mean, he's identified, as I said earlier, he has identified this as a sensitive issue for the UK, and something that's very difficult for Starmer politically. I don't really. Obviously, it remains to be seen, but I don't really think that this is an issue that will that he'll use to push to ingratiate the US with Latin American countries. I think there will be other, perhaps bigger issues and bigger ways that he will be able to do that.
Right. Okay. How about we put our Argentine thinking hats on and look at it from their perspective? Because if I'm President Javier Milei, I'm looking at this with money, because a little flattery goes a long way in the White House these days, and I'm sure, and we also know that President Trump and President Milei they share close relations, and it's a lot closer compared to Trump and Starmer. And we also know that the Trump administration really works with personality politics at the center. Now, given that we've got these close relations between President Milei and President Trump, do you think Argentina could probably use this to gain more leverage and to convince Trump that, hey, get a deal with us, and we will give you access to whatever you need. Do you think something like this can replace decades of alliance that the US has shared with Britain?
So you're absolutely right. Personal relationships are really important for Trump, and his decisions, which, as you said, can often be quite unpredictable. But they're quite often swayed by whether a leader is in favour with him or not at a particular moment. And you're absolutely right. He does seem to have a close relationship with Javier Milei. And a relationship that I think at the moment is probably better than the one that he has with Starmer. Although I think Starmer, worked very hard on the relationship earlier on, and I think the relationship has deteriorated over the last year. But it's a legitimate question to ask. I do question, though, whether this suggestion of a change of position on the Falklands has actually come from Trump himself or come from a conversation between Trump and Milei. I do think it probably more come out of an advisor or an official having added it to the list of ways of pressuring the UK, countries like the UK, to change its position on Iran. And perhaps an official or an advisor who knows the way Trump thinks. I don't know the answer to that, but certainly you're absolutely right. Milei could use his personal relationship to try and push for a US change of position. That could happen. But I think, and going to the other part of your question, I think the relationship between the UK and US, which is often referred to as a special relationship, although it's under strain right now, I think fundamentally it's a very strong relationship. It's based on shared history, shared values, and a collaboration across a range of political, economic, and military issues. Okay, it's going through a tough time now, but it's been through bumps in the road in the past and survived. And I think that that so-called special relationship is certainly, I think, going to outweigh any consideration, anything to do with Trump weighing in on the Falklands dispute, and also thinking more long term. That relationship is stronger than any one president or any one prime minister. So I really don't see certainly any replacement of the UK by another country in that special relationship, and I really don't think that it would be Argentina if there was any replacement. So yes, personal relationships are important, but I think that the special relationship between the UK and the US would always win out over the long term.
Right. You've already spoken to us, Simon, about the Falklands War that happened in the early 80s. And you've also explained how this dispute goes now almost 200 years. Now, let's say that the Trump administration keeps using the Falkland Islands cards, and they keep trying to show diplomatic support towards the Argentina. What are some of the options that the UK has to respond with? Because I'm not sure. I don't think the UK would like to remain silent on this.
No, the UK wouldn't remain silent, and the UK would stick to its position that it stands by the islanders' right to self-determination, and that full sovereignty rests with the UK. The question then would be how much pressure they were being put under by the US, and then how many other countries were joining in, and how difficult life was becoming, say, if there was a new UN process. I would still expect the UK to not to change its position, and to assert its sovereignty. But the question is how engaged it would be, how open it would be for new dialogue and new talks on the issue. I think also, I mean, your question is about a US shift of position. I think the experience of the UK and other NATO countries in responding to some of these quite quite surprising and extraordinary changes of position from Trump. And I'm thinking here, for me, one of the most extraordinary ones was Trump's position on Greenland. I think their experience of how to deal with him over that would be illustrative here.
Mhm.
And I think the experience they gained from that was that they would stand firm and say make it very clear what their position is, and that the position will not change. I think politically it'd be very, very difficult for any British Prime Minister to do anything other than that.
Hmm. Simon, before we wrap this up, so we've spoken about the UK and their position. We've spoken about Argentina and their position. We've got the Trump administration trying to open up a new front that the UK that the British Prime Minister has to deal with. But we haven't really talked about grassroots diplomacy, because when we look at what the people who live in Falkland Islands want, that is something that's often overlooked, because there was a referendum in 2013 where the islanders did get a chance to vote. Do you want to go and do you want to become citizens of Argentina, or do you want to remain British? And 99.8% voted to remain British. Now, that's an overwhelming majority. Now, given that we've already had this referendum, why does the dispute remain unsolved?
Well, you're absolutely right to mention the islanders, because, of course, this is something that has now got caught up in great geopolitical events, and of course, you must remember that we're talking about the future of the people who actually live there.
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right to mention that. To answer your question, I mean, obviously, from a British perspective, the UK would say that this remains unresolved because Argentina does not accept the results of that referendum and continues to assert its sovereignty. However, from an Argentinian perspective, it's still a very important political issue for them, and many see it as a historical injustice. So the issue has not gone away for them. So it is, in that sense, it is deadlocked, and you know, sovereignty is something that is really not divisible. It really is black and white. You know, either one country has sovereignty or another one does. So it's quite difficult to see how the sovereignty question could be resolved. I mean, I think you could start talking about things like power sharing or joint administrations and things like that. But I just don't think that would work. And you cited the results of the referendum, which were clear. I don't think anything like that would work. So resolving the sovereignty question, I think, becomes more a question of politics and pressure. And I think the only way that the dynamics would change on this would be some really big external factor to change the dynamics. A situation whereby one of the sides was under so much pressure to kind of change its position. And I really don't see that happening. I mean, we've talked in this interview about what the UK would do if it was put under pressure about the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands, but I just don't see, even if they're under pressure, I don't see them folding under that pressure to say, "Oh, okay, we're gonna give up our sovereignty of the islands and hand them over to Argentina." I don't see that happening. So it is I think likely to remain disputed for the foreseeable future.
So you don't think that the two sides, and when I say the two sides, I'm talking about the UK and Argentina, that they just get together and resolve this issue without a third party mediator?
Well, there have been many attempts over the years to do that, and it hasn't resolved the issue. I don't think whether you had a third party mediator or not, I don't think that would. I don't. However good the mediator was, I don't. Certainly speaking today, I don't see a way of resolving the dispute, and by resolving the dispute, we mean that both sides are happy. I think that's that's going going to be very difficult to achieve.
Right. Well, Simon, brilliant. This was brilliant. Thank you so much for speaking to Fair Observer. It was lovely having you.
Absolute pleasure, Rohan. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.